An interview, as I said, is a negotiation and a conversation. It is to see if you are fit for this program and if they are fit with your values, your goals, and your dreams. So, and what it is not is an interrogation. So, a lot of people, they prepare for those 15 minutes or 10 minutes that they are with the program director or whichever attending or faculty is directly across them in the office. But your interview starts the minute you step onto their campus, or the minute you have your pre-residency interview dinner, rather, and you're in contact with with the program and its residents and faculty. They'll tell you, oh, we want you to be relaxed. We won't use anything you do or say here at the interview dinner against you. But in truth, they're actually assessing you. How are you when you are relaxed, when you feel comfortable? How are you when you're in this intimate space of a residency interview dinner? And are you optimistic about this program? Are you curious about this program and asking questions and interacting and showing that you're going to be a fit? Because ultimately they'll have to work with you if they pick you, And at the same time, that is true on the interview day when you go to the lunch with the residents, when you go to the morning report or whatever grand rounds, whatever they show you. They're observing how are you behaving, how are you in tune with what's happening in front of you. Are you fully present? Or do you look like you're distracted? Do you look like you're very tense, etc.? So how you show up and how you negotiate with your own mindset before you even walk into the interview is your number one. And I'm going to come back to that. And what you do in those 15 minutes with each interviewer, and what you do when you're in these lunch and these pre-residency interview dinner, that is your chance to truly find out what the program is about as well. Who are they as people? Can you see yourself working with them? Even if you have only one interview, your goal is not to come from a place of despair and desperation and neediness. You need to show up as a confident person who is going to have not just something to offer them, but you're also wanting to see what they can offer you. So you're also curious about what they have on offer and how do you fit with this program. So with that said, the first thing I say, stay curious and stay optimistic. So there are 3 parts to the preparing for the interview and why I had this scheduled in July rather than in September. Most people, when they prepare for an interview, they look at that list of questions like the one I showed you and think, oh, if I just answer these questions and practice it in my head or in front of a computer camera like this, that I will be ready. But what you don't realize is what you think inside your thoughts. If you have negative thoughts or pessimistic, cynical thoughts or fear, it's going to project in your voice. It's going to project in your facial expression. It's going to project what my eyes just did there. That's called a micro expression. So you're going to have these minute second changes in your expressions. And the interviewer is going to notice them if they depict frustration, anxiety, negative emotions, stress. And so if they ask, so that's why they start with the most basic questions. They're getting you to tell your baseline to them and the direction of the conversation that you're willing to go with. And we're going to go into that in a little bit. And then they ask you progressively harder questions that have to make you think to see how you are, how would you be as a worker, as a resident in this system. Would you be somebody they can envision working with? Or are you somebody who they think will be problematic? And likewise, you have to assess them in the same way. So that is your power that you can leverage in the interview, is that you also have the opportunity to ask them questions by flipping the same questions back on them. And so the first part is you have to really negotiate your mindset, because your body language, the way your tone projects, whether you're smiling or not, your body posture, the word choice you use, it's like the difference between saying toxic versus non-productive. They may be the same message connotating two different things. So that will show up in the way you respond, especially if they ask you about a red flag, about a step 2 score that you have to retake, or a step 1 score that was low, or a remediation you had to do in medical school. So this is the first thing I want to keep in mind, and I'm going to give you some tips on that in a bit, on how you do that self-work. And then the second point is, once you're in the interview, because it's a conversation, what that means is you have to be fully present for the reasons I just mentioned, and also so you can observe what is their reaction to what you're saying, and improvise and be adaptable in the moment to noticing their reaction or emotional response to the way you're responding. And so you can maneuver your response back to them. And in negotiation, we call this reflective listening, or active listening, based off of the Carl Rogers psychotherapist and the standard of crisis hotline counseling, as well as the basis of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. So what most modern day psychotherapists and crisis counselors do, and also crisis hostage negotiators do, is they use reflective listening combined with strategic questioning to get people to open up. Because when people have negative emotions, their thinking and rationality is low, as one crisis hostage negotiator explained it to me. And so you want to bring down their resistance to where they can, and bring up their ability to think rationally in the moment. So there are 9 core skills that we go over in reflective listening, and that's, one second, let me see if there are any questions here. Okay. And that's the essence of the way I train people to negotiate and interview, is to learn how to reflectively listen back and respond back in a way that shows you heard what your interviewer is saying, and you also are asking them what are they looking for, so that you can see if you match with their program too, because that's essentially what they're trying to do with you. And then the third part of it is the post-interview, and this is where you go over what happened in this interview. Especially if you have multiple interviews, you want to go over and analyze, what did you do that you could have done differently, and what did you do that worked, that seemed to build rapport. So that's the overview of what I'm going to discuss. And there are 9 core skills. Actually, I'm going to go back to the self-help part, the pre-prepping for the interview last, because I want to talk first about what is reflective listening. So there are 9 core skills in reflective listening. The first is, in no particular order, summarizing. You can use a summary once you've gathered enough info from them to let them know that you want to clarify what they're saying. So that might start with, so based on what we discussed, and you will have a few notes that you may have jotted while they're talking to you. So you use that to summarize. And then As a result, you feel because. And then you ask, what am I missing, or have I missed anything? And the second thing is, and one of the easiest things to start practicing reflective listening is paraphrasing, using your own words to summarize a point in a more concise way than it was presented to you. So it would start with something like, in other words, or if I'm understanding you correctly, or what I'm hearing you say is XYZ. Is that correct? These are all ways of saying you didn't just sit there and listen to them and assume you understood what they said. Rather, you clarified that you had the right information and the right interpretation of that information from them. And then another way of doing that is what we call labeling. And that starts with words like, it sounds like, it feels like, it looks like, it seems like. And so when I go back to the prep phase, I'm going to tell you one thing to do with your resume, and that is going to be used to help you develop these kind of labels and deeper labels. So one of those things is you're going to break down every activity on your, and I'll state this again when we talk about the prep, but you're going to break down every activity on your resume and try to write the association words of what things, what traits or qualities it gives you. So for instance, if you are a South Indian classical dancer, Bharatanatyam, and that's something you have on your hobbies that makes you stand out, then what are some what are some things about Bharatanatyam? It's transcendence. You can think it takes hard work and dedication, persistence, a lot of time and sacrifice. So you need to have strong time management. It takes a lot of focus. You are storytelling. So you are through your dance. So you are having to pay attention to the details of every move, and as well as the coordination, the hand-eye coordination and foot coordination, etc. And these are skills, and you're creative and so perceptive. People who are musicians or dancers or artists are very perceptive and intuitive, which also relates to empathy, which is what we're discussing basically. And so so you might say to your interviewer, so what do you, how do you see your ideal candidate looking, or what do you look for in an ideal candidate? And they're gonna describe something to you, and it's gonna, within the context of what they say, they're gonna tell you some of the traits, either directly or indirectly in the way they respond to what they're looking for. And now you're going to think, now let's say they said they're looking for somebody who's really perceptive, and you're going to maybe bring up your dance or your hobby or even some project you did and how it allowed you to be, and you're going to say something like, so it sounds like you're looking for somebody who's very perceptive. And then you're going to give the example of whatever activity allowed you to show that you've developed that perceptual skills. And that's how you reflect back to them that you're understanding them, but you're also showing how you match up with them. And that's the goal of labeling. So and again, I'll say it when we do the prep, for every item on your resume, you want to break it down to what are the traits, one-word traits that help you show what are your strengths by having this activity. Another way is they might just bring up the activity, like with something like Bharatanatyam, that's something they haven't heard of. I had an interview where that was the only question, that was one of only 2 questions the chief resident asked me. Was about the Bharatanatyam, and that's the kind of things that I would have had to bring up in that moment, sorry. And so that I would have said, oh, this is a classical dance form from India, and I spent 3-4 years, whatever it was, learning, and this is what it taught me. It taught me to be very perceptive. It taught me how to focus. It taught me to be more intuitive, or whatever I want to say. And that is how you create a conversation rather than creating it like an interrogation or a question that you have to memorize the answer to. So I've talked about summaries, paraphrasing, and labeling. The next thing is that questions. When you question your interviewer, there are three types of questions. There's the mirroring. If I say, yeah, I was involved for 3 years in a crisis hotline, and you say, 3 years? It's 1 to 3, no more than 5 words that a person has said, and repeating that question back to them. And usually when a person mirrors, they do that because they're mirroring for a specific point that stood out to them when somebody has been talking for a while. So at the end, they may mirror that one small point, or they may paraphrase it to get the person to talk a little bit more. And then the second type is your open-ended questions. And the open-ended questions are what and how questions. Everything they're doing when they're asking you these questions are exactly that, or tell me about XYZ. So if they're asking you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? That is actually a form of a how question, and how do you envision your future looking like? They're trying to see in that moment, what are you going to contribute to their program and the growth of their program? And likewise, you can turn that same question back on them. How do you envision the future direction of this residency program? How do you envision the direction of this program in 5 years, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? Because that's going to give you information now about what are they willing to do. Are they just going to be stagnant and keep it the same, or are they trying to grow the program and make it better, continually make it better? And that's going to give you an idea, and that's what they're doing when they're asking you that. So the same thing with tell me about yourself. They're trying to see, how do you fit in to their program? Do you have the traits and the qualities that they're looking for? And are you going to contribute positively to their program? So you can turn that question also back on them, and after you answer, and say, what do you see as the ideal candidate for this program? And that's going to open up a conversation now, and then you're going to be able to do this labeling and then bring up some example. And it's going to create and they're going to have to respond more based on how you respond, rather than just going straight to the next question if they're skilled as an interviewer. So what questions in particular will help you gather and ferret information out of them, and will help them ferret information out of you? How questions usually, but not always, are for those like 5 to 10 year questions, where you're looking for the implementation. And the third type of question is what we call a no-oriented question. And this is usually best used when you're trying to invite somebody to the table. So when you're sending an email to ask if they would look over your application for you, you don't ask it in a yes-oriented way. You say, are you comfortable taking a look at my application or something, or would you be against looking at my application and providing me with some feedback or providing me with some advice? So that is, the third type of question is the no-oriented question. Sorry. So that's your three types of questions. So we talked about summaries, paraphrasing, labeling, and your three types of questions. So which includes, and mirroring is technically its own category, but I'm including it in the question. So we talked about 5 of them. Now I'm going to tell you a little secret, and I show you that document with the practice questions. You're going to learn that multiple of those questions are the same core question asked in 3 different ways. We call that the 3 times rule. And in fact, in medical school, when I was at the free clinic, they would ask 3 separate times in the same interview in 3 different ways the homeless patient if they were suicidal. And what they're doing is they're verifying that you're telling the truth. And you can think of this 3 times rule in 2 different ways in the interview. One, you're going to have maybe 2 or 3 different interviewers, and they're all going to ask you to some degree the same question in different forms. And they're going to see if you're consistent across the board. That's why you have to read between the lines and actually understand what the question is asking at its core and see, is this the same question just being reframed a different way? So if they ask you, how would your friends describe you? They ask you, tell me about yourself. They ask you, what was your greatest challenge? What was your greatest accomplishment? Or they ask you, what are your strengths and weaknesses? They're asking you the same exact question. The question is, what do you bring to this program? Why should we hire you? What is the core qualities that you have that will make you fit with what we are looking for in our mission statement and from whatever you ferreted out from them when you ask them what they're looking for. So that is what I want to make clear to you. Secondly, they may themselves in that same 15-minute span ask you these sort of questions over and over. They may ask you, tell me about yourself, but then ask you what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then ask you what your greatest challenge was, and then ask you what your greatest accomplishment was. Because they're trying to see, again, if you can give a consistent response. And the way you do that is, while you may dissect your resume for what each of the traits are and what each of the qualities and skills you bring to the table are by doing those things, you're going to notice a consistent pattern of what are your core 3 to 5 traits. So Hannah, that's something you should write, because this is in a PowerPoint from interviewing, is that you want to have 3 to 5 core traits that you want them to see about you when you go into the interview, and all of your responses will highlight those 3 to 5 traits. Like it may be that you're a very empathetic person, you're a very persistent person, you're very analytical, but you're also very perceptual. Whatever it is, that is the 3 to 5 core traits that are key to who you are. That should be reflected in all of your answers. And that is why they use this 3 times rule and ask you the same question in multiple forms. And I will pull up that document in a little bit to show you what I mean by that. In fact, I can do that just very quickly, just to make my point. I'll just do that really quickly, share. So, for instance, they may ask you, Tell me how you handle your commitments with your busy schedule. Tell me about how you handle stress. Share with me a time you were motivated to do something that was not easy. You know, tell me about a team or a time your team didn't meet their goals and how was it handled. Tell me about a time you faced dealing with a challenging team member or something. These are all asking the same question. How do you stay motivated? How do you stay committed? And how do you stay focused even when you're getting stressed out by the situation? So that's what we call the 3 times rule. And so I'm going to let Henna give you some of these interview prep questions. And I challenge you to read between the lines and ask yourself, is this question asking me the same thing another question is asking, just in a different form? And think about that, and then think about what are these 3 to 5 traits that you have, and how do you want that to reflect in how you approach such questions and the examples you give to demonstrate that you have those qualities. So let me see, what else am I missing? So then I went over questions, I went over mirrors, labels, paraphrasing, summaries, and I went over 3 times rule. There's one of them that you probably won't use as much is the I message. That's something that they use in psychotherapy and when you have to make boundaries with people. It's something you may use in residency with people, but not necessarily in the interview. But just for completeness, I'll tell you, it goes when you, I feel, because, and it's usually used when there's a persistent repetitive behavior that's not productive. And let me think really quickly, what are so I went over paraphrasing, summaries, labeling, questions, mirroring, iMessages, 3 times rule. There's 2 more I'm missing. Let me see really quickly. Let me just pull it up, my documents. Give me 1 minute because my brain is freezing right now. So we said, minimal encouragers and dynamic silence, of course. Okay, minimal encouragers are when you're nodding or you're saying, You know, a lot of people, when they go in interviews, they want to constantly nod. Don't do that. Just don't do that. You can nod if somebody is talking for a long time and occasionally nod in between just to acknowledge that you're still with them. But don't do it to every last statement that is said to you or it gets distracting. And the last one is dynamic silence. So when you give a label, when you mirror somebody, when you ask a question, always take 2 to 4 seconds of silence and let it marinate with the person you delivered it to, because then that's going to give them a chance to respond. A lot of people, the hardest thing for them, because they have this racing mind from the anxiety or the stress or the overexcitement, they want to be heard. So what they do is they tend to get very anxious if there's a pause or a silence in between and the other person is thinking. So keep 2 to 5 seconds, but no more than 10 before you speak again, if the other person hasn't spoken yet, because most people will likely have spoken by the second. But if you don't give a pause, then you're not giving people a chance to talk or think before they respond. And you too, when they ask you a question, you can take 2 to 5 seconds to respond. You don't have to just talk the second that they finish their last word. So collect your thoughts quickly in those 5 seconds and think about what you want to say. Take that deep breath if you need to. So those are the core 9 skills. And then within the labeling skill that I mentioned earlier, there's a few different sub-forms of labeling. So what is labeling, paraphrasing? What is the purpose of summarizing, asking questions? It's to show empathy, to show perspective taking. And in particular, we call it cognitive empathy in psychology, which is the verbal component of empathy. We've all heard of emotional empathy, the idea that you can feel somebody's negative energy, their positive energy, you get this vibe. You get a sense that there's something deeper going on with them. But what cognitive empathy is the way that you ferret that out of them and you show them that you're understanding what they're feeling, what they're thinking, their circumstances or their dynamics in the moment. So that's the purpose of why you use these 9 skills. And in particularly, you use these, what I want to say is with this labeling, you can think of labeling as making a presumption or a best guesstimate about what they're feeling or thinking. So one of the forms of labeling is what we call the mislabel. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, you have those resume breakdown of those traits. So the same time when somebody else tells you something, you should think of word association. So again, using the example with a hobby with, let's say, drawing or painting. When a person is an artist, they are usually perceptive. They are intuitive. They're somebody who's not afraid to paint or draw what they're seeing happening in front of them, the issues in front of them, the times in front of them. They're storytellers. But they're also oftentimes very bold people who are not afraid of going against the status quo. In fact, traditionally, artists were the ones who went against the status quo and just painted what they saw or the hidden subliminal messages of what was happening in that time. In fact, the word empathy is derived from, related to artists and trying to figure out what the artist was thinking and feeling when they painted or drew the pictures that they drew. And so if you have that on your hobby list and or they tell you that they're an artist, you may think of these kind of terms as association terms to create a deeper label. So instead of just saying you're creative, or you like color, or you like some superficial thing, you may say something like, oh, it sounds like you're a very bold person. Oh, it sounds like you're not afraid of going against the status quo. It sounds like you believe in advocacy and fighting for the justice and the causes, or fighting for your patients, And so this is what is meant by word association and what I meant even with your own resume, what you should be doing. But when your interviewer talks, you should be able to do the same thing to them. If they are an internist, what are the qualities and traits? Somebody who's long-term care, maybe they are more analytical, something like that. And so whatever they tell you, so somebody says, for instance, that they're a punctual person, you might think organized and meticulous. Those would be a deeper label rather than just saying, seems like you like to be on time, which is superficial. But if you say, seems like you're an organized person, it seems like you're very task-focused or task-oriented, that is a deeper label saying something about their personality traits. And that is what you're trying to do with your interviewer too, is use this word association to find out a little bit more. And what's going to happen is if you get it wrong, they're going to correct you, because everybody gives into correction addiction, as Chris Ross often says. And I can attest to that, because that has been me a big part of my life, that if somebody says something wrong, I'm so tempted to correct them, but we all do. And that's the beauty of using these kind of labeling statements, because if you get it wrong, whether it was intentional or unintentional, they're going to correct you. But if you get it right, they're going to feel like you understood them. And so you're going to build rapport with them. And so that is the core of how the interview should be going, is this reflective listening. So I mentioned earlier, and when you're doing the interview, you can ask them ahead of time, can I jot down a few notes? So especially if you want to summarize them or something, or they've told you a few things, but don't try to write down every word they're saying, just try to write down some key points. And that key points can also be used post-interview to write your thank you notes, so that you have some details of what was actually said in the interview, because you want to kind of personalize it. But you don't want your post-interview thank you notes, or whether it's email or handwritten, to be too long. Keep them short and concise, but bring up some point that resonated with you in the interview. Now, when I mentioned that labels are also, there's multiple types, there's also something called preemptively labeling something. So if you have red flags on your application, this is one way you can empower yourself and get before. You can bring up the elephant in the room before they talk about it, before they ask you. Or even if they ask you already, like, what are your challenges? You can bring up the elephant, frame it in a way, I'm going to bring up the elephant in the room here. Because they want to know that you are self-aware as well as you're situationally aware. They want to know that you are self-aware of your own flaws. But then once you bring it up, you can bring it to, you can then reframe and what you learned from those experiences. So, it might be something like, you probably think, or you probably are wondering why I had to retake USMLE Step 2. You probably are feeling hesitant about me because I had a remediation. And this is what I learned from that experience. Not but, not or because, just say, and this is what I learned. And that is how you're showing you are self-aware of what was negative in your application, because if they have to bring it up first, it's actually going to reflect back on you more negatively. I mean, you should still address it in as positive a way if they bring it up first, but take your chance to bring it up before they bring up a negative. Don't try to run away from your negative points on your application, because that is going to show them that you're confident and you own yourself. So that is the main core skills of the interview. And as I think I already went over the post-interview. And again, with the post-interview, you want to think about what went right and what could you do differently when you're done with the interview, if you have multiple more interviews, because you want to think about, how can I improve for my next interview? You don't want to just assume, oh, I just practiced the same question sheet where I have all my answers written down. And on that note, I'll talk about prep last, but as far as the self-help part, to get past your beliefs. But I do want to talk about one part of prep now. I want to go share my screen and bring up the questions. When you're prepping for these questions, this document that my university gave, I'm going to give her, and it has a ton of questions in different areas. Social awareness and emotional intelligence. Everything we've talked about today is emotional intelligence. It requires both self-awareness and situational awareness. As I said, you have to bring up, if they ask you things like experiences where you had a bad situation, where you had to deliver bad news, anything negative, they're trying to see how you are able to handle stress and how well you are able to be self-aware of yourself as well in those moments of how those things affect you. Teamwork, leadership, motivation. So what I want to say is that, let me think for a second. So when you prepare for these things, the first thing you're going to do is, I'm going to show you, I did it on my own resume, is you're going to dissect down your resume. Let me find it in my own folder. Wrong folder. Where's my folder? So the first thing you want to do when you prepare for the interview is you want to ask yourself, were there any setbacks? Were there any challenges? This is just my let's start from here. Were there any setbacks? Were there any challenges? And if the answer is yes, what were they? What was the reason for them? Then you're going to do what makes you desirable. So you're going to write everything that the particular experience has taught you. It could be one-word associations or it could be full sentences, but things like teamwork, things like enduring long hours, things like communication here with the physicians, you know. And you're going to do this this is the first step, because this is what you're going to use to form those labels. And this is what's going to help you be able to see what strength and what value you bring to them. Because you are having to ask yourself, what am I bringing to the table to them? Not just thinking of yourself as a disempowered person. You know, you want to show that you have some value that you can bring to them. So resourceful, teamwork, collaboration, things like that. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you. The second thing is in prepping. So besides that, the thing you want to ask yourself is, how am I going to show up to, what kind of emotional baggage am I bringing to this, what kind of emotional baggage am I bringing to this table? So this is where I bring up a four-wall analogy that I read in a book by an author called named Michael Burnoff. Michael Burnoff is a life coach and an entrepreneur who says, you know, we die in a box and we're put in a box in a casket, but even in our life, we have an invisible box around us. And he says we have four walls. Our first wall is our dream wall, our targets and our goals. What stories are we telling us in our head about why we can't get there? What's holding us back? And if we have some stories, that means there's a fear there to be uncovered. And what is that fear? And what are we going to do to challenge that fear? What small steps small goals are we going to make daily until we reach our greater goal? So that's the first thing. The second, so we can call that our dream wall. And then he says the second wall is our back wall. That's our support wall. And that is all the stories we tell ourselves about our past. What repressed memories do we have, and what non-repressed memories have we been ruminating about that are negative memories that we don't want to face up to ourselves? And how is that influencing how we subconsciously show up to the interview? That pessimism and that cynicism and that fear going into the interview. So such as, I didn't match last year, or I didn't match for 2 years in a row, or I don't interview well, I never interviewed well, I always had these bad experiences, and now I'm fearful of interviewing because I'm fearful of having it happen again. That has to be reframed. So the first thing you have to do is allow yourself to write down what these fears are, and allow yourself to write, I forgive myself for whatever happened in the past, and describe those situations and forgive yourself for, and then you have to reframe how you want to show up and allow yourself to vision how you want to show up, and what steps are you going to work to again to get past the fears that your past caused you. Then on your left is your relationship wall. Who is holding you back? Who is trying to keep you where you are at in this moment? Who in your crowd is going to allow you to grow and grow with you? And who is going to try to drag you down? And you have to be able to kind of distance yourself from those who are trying to bring you down more and trying to bring negative energy in your life, because you want to show up your best. So when you're not being sucked back into a negative cycle. And then on your right is your identity wall, defined by your cultural beliefs, your cultural codes, your religious codes, your personal codes, how you see yourself. If you see yourself as, oh, they're just giving me this interview, and you see yourself in because out of pity, and that's your negative self-talk in there, when you go in, it's going to come out in your tone of voice. It's going to come out in the fact that you're not probably going to be smiling, even though you think you're putting on a smile. You may think your tone is coming off a certain way, but deep down, they will sense the minute change in your tone, or they'll ask you a tough question about a red flag, and you'll freeze up. So part of your prep work is going over these walls that you've built around yourself and asking yourself, what small goal am I going to take from now to when the interview season starts so that I show up my best? And the third part of interview prepping is you need to do the research. You need to find out everything you can about the programs that you're applying to. And I know if you've applied to several hundred, it's kind of hard, but at the very least, start with what is their mission statement? What can I find out about the program director and the associate program directors? So, because you won't necessarily know who your interviewers are unless they tell you ahead of time, if you get an invite. So you can't go over every faculty member and their mother, but you can at least find out as much as you can about the program directors and the mission statement of the program, and about the program, not just the curriculum, but what you can find out about the hospitals or the places they're affiliated with. What is the kind of research being done? Again, you won't be able to get every knick-knack of research, but especially if you have a vision in your dream wall of, this is what I'm looking for in a program. I want a program that does research in, I don't know, epilepsy, or I want a program that does in pediatric epilepsy or something, or I want a program that is academic focused. I want a program that's in an urban city, or something like, I want a program that's in a rural location or in an urban poor community, because I'm very service oriented. You want to find out from their website what matches with what your ultimate real dream and goal is that you have at this moment. Granted, that can change down the road. And what does that program have in way of that? Because part of the questions, and I'll give Henna a document which has the questions to ask them, or how to frame questions. But part of the questions you want to ask them is, the ones that are tailored to what are your goals and what are your aspirations. And that's why they always ask you, beyond asking you where you see yourself 5 to 10 years, they may ask you if there's a particular area that you're interested in, like cardiology, or if you're in pediatric neurology, pediatric epilepsy. And then they're going to maybe tell you, oh, this is the person you need to talk to. So you have to know your why. Why are you wanting to be this field of medicine? And what is it about it that interests you? Have a few questions related to that. Look up who's the people involved in that particular area if they have it. If they don't, ask them what opportunities there are to get in touch with people who do that kind of work at that program. So part of that's the research piece, finding out what is the common illnesses or the common type of disorders that they see there that are prevalent. Looking up public health records is one thing my friend did when he was researching. He's in family medicine and he was more community medicine driven, so he looked up those kind of things in the public health department that were pertinent to him. And he's a Black American male, so he wanted to know things about like the maternal mortality rate for Black American females, for instance. And when you find things like that and you ask questions related to stuff like that, that's more specific to what your interest is, that also communicates to them that you're confident and that you're ready to really get started in residency. So it's not just what is your board pass rate and all those standard typical questions that they tell you. It's these specific questions that distinguish, and it's the way you can get them to also open up about what they're looking for and turn it into a conversation that will make you stand apart from the person who just looks at the standard questions. And don't be afraid to ask every interviewer the same 2 or 3 questions. I mean, you may have one question that's specifically tailored to them, and you may have one question that you want from all 3 to see if they are consistent across the board, for instance. So again, you have to do the self-work on yourself to know what is holding you back really internally. You need to do the research on every program, at the very least of who the program directors are and what is the basic focus of the program mission statement, what is the type of program, what is the hospital types, community versus academic centers, research focus versus community focus, urban, rural, etc. And then is going over the questions and really examining how those questions are similar or different, and knowing what your 3 to 5 core traits are. So that's and then practicing with somebody, the interview. So those are the 4 stages of prep. And I think that's basically what I have. Are there any particular questions? Hannah?
We had one question from Claire asking, at what point should I bring up the negative in my resume?
It depends on how confident you are going in there. There's some people who will open up a negotiation with laying out the elephant in the room. I don't know if that would work here. I think you should start with tell me about yourself, but you can, if you really feel comfortable, you can bring it up with one line. Before we go any further, I want to just address the elephants in the room. Or you can wait till they ask, not specifically about that challenge, but like a more general, were there any challenges, and then bring it up. And be very forthright, like don't try to sidestep it, But don't wait till like you're towards the end of the interview and they've already asked you more, because they go more general to more detailed questions is what I noticed in residency interviews. They start with more general questions so you can direct the conversation a little bit, and so you can get comfortable, because again, if emotions are high, rational thinking is low, as my crisis negotiation coaches often tell you. And so You want to bring the emotion down. And so that's why they ask you, tell me about yourself. And questions like, how would your friends describe you? Or what seems simple, but is actually much deeper questions. And then they start asking you about, tell me about the greatest challenge you faced. What's your weaknesses and strengths? So, that's a time when you can bring it up too, is when they ask you what's your weaknesses, because they're basically asking you what is the negative point in your application and about you, and they want to see that you have self-awareness and that you're not afraid to own your negative points, your flaws in your application, and say what you learned from it. Because remember, failure is nothing more than the first attempt in learning. And you can either choose to fail forward or you can fail backwards. Any more questions?
Yeah, so our next question is from Toyosi. It's how can I structure my resume to provide keyword associations about myself?
So you are picking apart let me just show you my own resume dissection. You are picking apart every, I'm just going to use some example of something. You're picking apart every activity you ever did. You're first saying why it makes you desirable. If it's your research thesis, for instance, it shows curiosity, self-directed learning. It shows your analytical, problem solving, teamwork, collaboration, resourceful, persistent, discipline, determination, time management, organized, systematic, structured, methodical, meticulous, whatever words you want to use, task-oriented, able to prepare. Then you're saying your second question you're asking to yourself, and I have a document, I should find it and I'll send it to Hannah. I think I may have given it to her, but it's a prep document which tells you to do exactly this. What are your setbacks and challenges? And then it tells you, setbacks and challenges. If you have yes to that, were there any setbacks and challenges? Then you say, okay, now these are what the setbacks and challenges are. And then you do that for every item on your resume. And as you do that, then you look at what are the consistent themes like resourceful, time management, organized. And that's going to give you those 5 core skills and look at the ones that you think are the 5 most important of those kind of traits that are being listed over and over. What is the ones that are most common and what are the ones that you most want to emphasize? And that's how you figure out what is the key traits that you're trying to show them. Does that make sense? Oh, oops, what happened? Okay, good. Any more questions? Anna?
No other questions at this time.
Okay. Okay. I think I've bombarded you with enough information for one night. Any closing remarks from you, Hannah?
Nothing for me. Let's see. Yes, Claire, you will get a copy of the questions. Dr. Shah will be sending me that and send it to you. Okay, Nasima has a question. He's saying sorry, I don't know if it's she, but they're saying the trouble with the tell me about yourself question. So how would you approach that question?
So, as I was saying just a few minutes ago, and as I was saying earlier, what tell me about yourself is really asking you is the same thing. What is your strengths and weaknesses? What is the greatest challenge you've had and what is your greatest accomplishment? How would your friends describe you? They're all asking one major truth. What makes you, why should we pick you here? What are you going to add to this program? What is the qualities and traits you bring as a physician that is going to enhance and be productive for this particular program. And so tell me about yourself. One of the documents I have, and I can give you the old folder that I had given my own former medical school classmates, and some of the people the year after us. There's the AAMC PowerPoint, and they say that when you have these 3 to 5 traits that you want, like the ones that are in that resume dissection, then what you use is to use those traits to show what is it that you're really bringing to the table. You're trying to show how those traits are what you're bringing to the table. So you're not just saying, I'm from XYZ school. You're kind of telling why you want to be at this program and what it is about that field of medicine, and that, what it is you bring to that field of medicine, whether it's internal medicine or pediatrics. So you're looking at the traits. And another thing you can do is look at the traits that are like common to that particular field of medicine and see how that fits with your core traits that you're seeing in your resume dissection. And what that's going to do is it's going to show you why, and that's going to be how you're going to structure your tell me about yourself, because you're going to say, what you're going to do is you're going to indirectly show them those traits by telling them a little bit about themselves that demonstrates those traits, if that makes sense. And so it's just a way to get the conversation going and showing them from the get-go, these are the traits of who I am. And that's where, you may mention some of those hobbies or some of those core activities that you did that demonstrate those qualities at the very tail end, after you kind of tell them a little bit about yourself, and why you wanted to go in that particular field of medicine. And in fact, when you're telling them why you're going in that field of medicine, you are saying it in a way that's demonstrating those particular traits that you're trying to get across to them. So that's basically the goal of Tell Me About Yourself. It's not just, I'm from XYZ University in XYZ city state, hope that makes sense. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, just following up with that, Claire would like to follow up asking, if we bring up the strengths and weaknesses in the tell me about yourself part, then if later the interview process they ask, what are your strengths and weaknesses, do we just repeat what we said in the beginning? Or is there another way to approach it?
Well, remember, just like the 3 times rule, you can state the same thing in different ways. You can always state the same thing in different ways. That's the point. Every question you answer, you answer to relay those key traits and those key things. So even if you've told it and tell me about yourself, you can restate it in a different way. And again, using an example of something, like of a situation. I think they talk about a lot in interview format, the STAR acronym, situation, task, action, results, or something. So that's how you can think of a particular situation that displayed how you did that, and to show it in a different way and still get the same message across. And they're going to begin to see that consistency. Anything else?
Any other questions from the group? All right, I don't think we have any more questions at this time. Is there anything you would like to add?
I just want to make one point again. I brought up the self-help work for a reason. A lot of people think that if they just practice an interview, a mock interview, that they'll show up and they'll look confident. And in their mind, they may be thinking they're confident, but they're not seeing their body language in the moment. They're not seeing, really hearing their tone of voice or the shifts in their tone of voice when they're talking. Like right now, because I'm looking at myself in this camera, I can see everything my body language is doing, and I can feel it actually even in my muscles. But a lot of people are not very mindful, so they don't realize that the tension and the anxiety and the cognitive load of the anxiety and stress, even if they practice these things, when they get there, they freeze. They go in fight, flight, freeze mode. So that's why you have to face up to these fears ahead of time. And there are different things you can do: breath work, EFT, doing journaling, and just examining these things and reframing it, how you're going to think about it, and allowing yourself to forgive yourself for past failures or past failures. But if you do that work, you'll come off more confident naturally. Then you're not trying to just memorize a tone or memorize an answer, because you're not going to be taken aback if they ask something that's uncomfortable, because you're going to have thought about those uncomfortable moments and anticipated them ahead of time and how you're going to react in the moment. And some of the things you can do in the moment if you're stressed in the interview too is just kind of take a few deep breaths before you talk, and count backwards from 10, if you're sitting where your hand is not, you can press your thumb into your palm and hold it, in your lap to kind of calm yourself down. These are little tips and tricks while you're in that actual interview, or if you're sitting at a conference table and you're feeling a little anxious, you can hold your hand under the hands under the table and again press and kind of squeeze a little bit just to be able to control yourself. And the one thing I'll also give you is one final point. So Isaac Betancourt, who's a crisis hostage negotiator turned business negotiator and who is my negotiation coach, he actually says this all the time: put your ego aside, even if you're feeling defensive, take that deep breath, count backwards to 10, from 10, and remember the goal. Always remember your adversary is not the person across you, in the words of Chris Voss, his former colleague. And it is the goal in front of you. So take this word from these two wise crisis negotiators. And if you remember the goal, you'll stay on task. If you are thinking about your reactions because you heard something uncomfortable, you'll freeze up. So keep your goal in mind. And actually, one final point. And I will say that while the goal is important, also stay curious and open to what they're saying and be present in the moment to see how they're reacting to you as well. Okay, and now I'm done. Anything else? And should I hit end video?
I don't see anything in the chat.
They're talking about PS and CV reviews.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about what professional services they have for that. Okay. Okay, so should I end the video then, or what do you want me to do? Hannah?
I'm back. I apologize for that.
Okay. Should I end the video then, or?
All right. Well, I'm just going to conclude. Thank you so much, Dr. Shah, for giving this little introduction to the training and how to work with these skills to improve interviews. And thank you to everyone that attended. I will be sending out an email, a follow-up email after this with the list of questions that Dr. Shah was going over. And this video will be posted on YouTube and our site. All right. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at info@asphysicians.org. Also check our website for upcoming events.